Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. Today is January 4th, 2022. Happy blessings for a beautiful new year to everyone who's watching and everyone that you're connected to. Today, I'm going through Level 1, Lesson 3, and Level 2, Lesson 2. So I had been lavishing a lot of attention on Level 1, Lesson 2. We're through with that, but now you're going to start to see that the Level 1 stuff and Level 2 stuff are starting to synchronize and go in parallel. So you'll see that with today's presentation a lot more too. So we're starting off with the idea in Level 1, Lesson 3 of the shape of time and this time vortex and time symmetry. So let me jump right into, I'm so happy. Another person is coming in. Before I jump to my whiteboard where I cannot see the incoming people. So first of all, welcome, welcome. Good to see you, T. And hold on, I'm just waiting for this person to tune on in because I know that they're coming from a divergent time zone. Hello, welcome. It's so good to see you. And I'm happy that you're here. And let me also just, there you go. Just making sure everyone is muted because I know you're in a divergent time zone. So I'm happy that you're able to make it. And I'm just getting going on a whiteboard all about the time vortex. So, okay, and this is the Level 1 stuff. Let me draw this out for you. And this is going to begin to become, let me also change this view so that it's, there you go, you can see me. This is going to become a very familiar little line drawing diagram that I'm going to draw for you all the time in class, even though that might not be the most perfect drawing. So wait, actually, let me draw it a little bit smaller. Like this, and like this. The time vortex, starting with year 0 down here and moving upward in this direction towards longer chronology and then eventually towards infinity. Just keep on going endlessly on the endless journey. And with the understanding that this is a flat, two-dimensional simplification of a pathway around a vortex that is actually spiral. But because I'm working with line drawings on a flat screen, that might be a little bit difficult to understand and perceive. So I simplify them as being pathways. I'll choose a different color. Pathways that start off here. Here, that would be year 0, and then march upward towards here. And then with the understanding that this black line is actually a flowing membrane, and it flows this way and it flows in this direction. But with your understanding and perception added, that everything in this world that I'm teaching you about is a two-way highway. So you also do have energy that flows in this direction. And in future lessons, I will give you a close-up version. Like if I show you what this road, this membrane of death looks like along here, it's actually a multi-lane highway where we've got some highways that are moving in this direction, some cars in this direction, some cars in this direction. And then of course, that's an idealized version, but there are blockages like here's a wreck. There's a blockage there of energy that doesn't flow exactly right. But that's for us. I'm working just on the basics right now, and this is Level 1, but understand that I will get to greater details of exactly what's going on. And all of this stuff relates to what I'm going to tell you about in Level 2 with the understanding and definition of what is an ascended master and the journey of you becoming an ascended master. And the spoiler alert, I'll go to this, I'll make it a nice, beautiful purple color. This pathway here that goes up the central core of this shape is the pathway of ascended mastery. It is also the pathway of least likelihood. And that has to do with probability in terms of the entirety shape of what this is. So probability is the sense of like, if you flip a coin, you have a 50-50 chance, 1 out of 2, that it will be heads or that it will be tails. But here you have all of these other options other than purple, a lot, let's say billions of options. And then you only have one option that is the timeline that goes up the center of this time structure. And that leads you to infinity and leads you on your eternal journey. So in the first hour of this class is devoted to Level 1 stuff. The second hour will be the advanced stuff where I will tell you more about the characteristics of that journey, of who you are on that journey, of what it is like to become more and more in alignment. So I'm holding up my pen. Here's you slightly askew as you go on your journey, more and more and more and more and more in alignment until you're perfectly vertical like this. And that's you as an ascended master. That's what's coming up in part, level 2 of this recording that will be in roughly 1 hour. This initial stuff, I want you to understand the idea of time symmetry. So even while, okay, let's say, first of all, the infinitely stretchy fabric of the cosmos. Here I'm drawing it as a flat plane. And I'm making these lines as if it is a checkerboard so that you can understand it's a plane that has, 2 dimensions to it. And if I put an impulse or a heavy bowling ball on it, here's the infinitely heavy bowling ball of the cosmos, and it goes downward like this, it begins to stretch that fabric. And the more the bowling ball stretches downward, the more stretchy this fabric becomes until it gets stretched out to an infinite amount. So I'm going to put infinity down here with you, the understanding that the impulse keeps on traveling in that direction downward infinitely, and it never stops, and it keeps on going. And that the stretchy fabric of time, space, and reality stretches infinitely too. And I already got through this in lesson 1, level 2, with that definition of that infinitely stretched point as being called the singularity. That also is this point over here where I'm talking about, which is infinity, just at the opposite end in this particular diagram. The idea of, in science, the place where all of the rules of physicality break down. So there's rules of physics, like the laws of gravity, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of how physical matter is held together. But when you go, so this would be analogous to the singularity in science talk, a black hole, where you have stretched the fabric of consciousness going inward an infinite amount of time. So like, here's a black hole spiraling inward, inward, inward. And when you get to that event horizon, you get to that area internally, that the laws of physics break down. Science doesn't have a telescope that can look into that level of reality, or a microscope, or a way of actually perceiving it. But what science does have is equations, like 1 + 1 = 2. That's a way of perceiving or abstractifying reality. And I heard a scientist one time talk about math as being a type of ESP, or extrasensory perception, a way that you can see into dimensions or perceive or sense into dimensions that would otherwise be not perceptible to you as the viewer. So I see into those dimensions with, I'm pointing right now to my brow chakra, into my eye of insight, and I'll talk about you with that on this journey right now, on this level 1 stuff. I use my insight in order to see into these levels of reality here, what's going on here, and even what this is shaped like. But the science of this time and place is not based in insight. It is based in math and in calculations. So they use math in order to determine what is going on at the level of a black hole. And what they determine is, at that level, all of the equations break down and nothing makes sense. And that's kind of like what I was saying the other day, matter plus energy, which would be E in the great equation, E = mc² equals the flying rainbow lasagna, that science would say, well, wait, none of that makes sense, because this and this are supposed to be balancing each other out, but we've put them both on the same side of the equation. How can that be? It's like this plus this is the totality of everything. Totality of everything equals the totality of everything is basically what you're coming up with. So you start to get into, I hope this is not too abstract, but you start to get into ideas where the math breaks down, the math symbolic logic structure breaks down, and you just end up with infinity. Infinity equals infinity, and that is a basic truth. Mirror imagery. So this, let me put a different color. This membrane of death here is the continuation of a much larger circle that goes up and off your screen. And this is also a much larger circle that goes up and off your screen. And that is the cross section of a torus. And you can see over here, that gap is really essential, that those loops of time that emanate outward from the singularity are actually not touching, that there is this very, very crucial open space opening there. That is the place where the purple pathway is actually able to exit this level of reality. So none of this is meant to be a trap. And I've learned that I have to use this language in presenting this, because everyone is like, I'm stuck here in reality and I'm trapped. Get me out, get me out. I've been through the karmic washing machine so many times. So I have to affirm to you, it is not meant to be a trap. It is meant to be a refinery of consciousness, where if you are at this angle or askew, or if you are occupying these areas over to the periphery of your life, you are not in alignment with your true eternal being self as a divine presence, as God. And therefore you need to do more learning or more refinement. You're not supposed to be going in this direction that my pen is going. You need to get refined and go up in this direction. Not meant to be punishment, not meant to be toil and suffering, even though many people experience it in that way. Know and understand that this impulse, this infinitely heavy bowling ball, that it's going in this direction here, has its complement or a mirror image, because there is such a thing as time symmetry. Supersymmetry is a concept that is also explored in higher dimensional math and science. And that's the idea that there is a mirror image going in this direction, and that both of those life vortexes or map of life of who you are, both of it is you. And also, please understand, there's one that's coming from this direction, going in this direction. And then there's even one that's coming in this direction. Oops, terrible drawing, going in this direction. And one that's coming from the top down. And even one that's coming in from, let's say, you, the viewer, from the angle of the camera. And one that is coming from behind, pointed towards the camera. And then even when you get really fancy, an infinite array, like a dandelion seed head, coming from every direction, from every possible angle, which I will not draw for you, but please use your imagination to embroider that into reality, that all of these are different facets or fractal miniature versions of your own life. Wait, hold on a second, because someone's got to come in. Admitting everyone who needs to come in. I'm happy that that little notification came up while I was in the whiteboard so you could see it. All of those versions of life are you. Big, 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 like big emphasis. I keep on telling you this, like spoiler alert, it's all you. You are traveling through time, space, and reality, meeting yourself and reflecting off of yourself from various different angles. And that's the big learning of this, that each one of us, each one of you, each one of self, that I self am talking to, language becomes inadequate to be able to talk about these things, is God, the divine presence, not necessarily an anthropocentric God or a God, oh, cheeky, keep it cool, of human religion or mythology or human dogma, but the abstract divine presence, the zeroth dimension, the singularity that has distanced itself from self, gone on its journey, is bouncing all around like amazing ping pong balls of consciousness. We are bouncing off of ourselves. We are learning from ourselves. And that eventually what happens is each one of us reaches the perfect alignment, refinement of consciousness, ascension moment. You make it back to that point of infinity, along with all of the other radiant spokes of self coming from every other direction. And all of these places where my fingers are touching come together. And you have that moment, that is the aha moment, where you think the thought, I am God. And there's a whole lesson that I have, but that's spoiler alert, that's what we're heading up to. So I have a whole lesson called the I am God circuit, but just know that that's what you're heading up to. So there is a mirror image in just the beginning understanding of the time vortex. You in your life heading from the periphery out here on the edge of your time vortex towards the center. And also there is a complementary impulse that's at the other end. Let's show you on the whiteboard. You have this mirror image here. So just as you're an infinitely heavy bowling ball stretching the fabric in this direction, you're also an infinitely heavy bowling ball stretching the fabric in this direction and coming in from all these other directions. And this has to do with the language of harmonics that I was talking about in lesson 2. Part of the syntax of the language of harmonics is symmetry, symmetry as balance, symmetry as structural integrity. So there are certain natural shapes that have structural integrity that are symmetrical, like a dewdrop or a soap bubble or an egg. And many of these are circular or ovoid, but the point is that they're symmetrical. So that means that they share forces on all sides. The forces are equalized on all sides. And what you're really looking at when you are looking at toroids are collections of bubbles. Like over here is a bubble on one side, over here's a bubble on one side, here's another bubble over here, here's another bubble over here. And of course, I'm drawing flat cross sections, but you know that they're spheres, and you also know that they turn around. So the creation of a torus, like if I'm drawing a cross section like this, that looks like whatever, two glasses or something like that, like, you know, two eyeball glasses, what you're actually looking at is a donut that goes all the way around like this. And the donut is created by my hand as a sphere circulating, spinning around like this. Okay, so now you're getting my language. Like when I draw a stick figure, you understand I'm drawing an actual person with an actual spherical head, but everything is flat. And I'm drawing you time stick figures so that you can understand this. Let's do from the top down. Timelines and possibilities exist like an old-fashioned analog record. Now I'm going to clear all this out. Don't be concerned. Clear it all out. Good. For those of you who are young people, I'm only joking, an old-fashioned analog record, like a plastic or wax, it used to be made out of wax record. Here's the center where you put it on a spindle. I'm looking at it from the top down. And then there is one, I should use a different color here, one big long groove that is in the record that contains the songs in order. And that means like, it wasn't that easy if you didn't like a song. If you're like, I like songs 1, 2, and 3 on this album, but song 4 stinks, and then I wanted to skip to song number 7. You can do that easily on a CD, program it in, or just press forward, but much harder on an old-fashioned analog record, where let's choose a red for the needle of awareness. Here's the needle. The needle is like your focal point of your eyesight, of your inner eye, and I'll get to some drawings about that, that determines which song is playing. And if you're on this particular song over here, like I love this song by Led Zeppelin or whatever, but then you don't like it that much, the next song you want to skip over here, you have to literally pick up the needle, move it over, and then place it back down on the next groove. And in many ways, that is what timeline jumping and flying rainbow lasagna is all about. So this is the top down from the viewpoint of one of these in cross section from the side. So this central core timeline over here is the infinity point. There's only one of that. So there's one, like if this is like a bullseye, you can hit one arrow over here into the center. And that's like, hooray, you won the game of life. You hit your arrow into the center. You are now an ascended master. But there's 10 million arrows that can be shot into the bullseye in all of these other places, all of these other songs, all of these other possibilities. That means something that can just happen. Probabilities means 1 in 10 billion. You have a one-shot version of going to the center, but you have a 10 million billion trillion probable likelihood of landing an arrow in the outer areas all around there. And the outer areas are areas of distortion. I presented them as places where sometimes you just die errantly, like when you were a baby and you died because the cord was wrapped around your throat. But in many ways, that is created by the process of you turning around and twisting around in the womb. These errant places, these errant lives, calculations that, there we go, a new person's coming in, these errant lives that do not add up to infinity, that add up to death. No judgment on you, because we've all got them. They are erroneous calculations of the body being of you moving through time. It means that you made the wrong calculations, you made the wrong choice, something that you did made you die. And then what you are able to do in the quote unquote choose your own adventure novel of your life is make a different choice. And in so doing, you are continually marching closer and closer and closer to being able to aim your arrow of awareness directly at the center. Martin has a great question. He says, why is the middle one, the path of least likelihood, the path of least likelihood? And the answer is, if I make this the red arrow that goes directly home to infinity, there is literally only one possibility where that can happen. The ratio is 1 to, 10 million, billion, like over here where wait, let's make it with different colors so that you can get more of an idea of this. 1 to 10 million, billion. Okay, so that's one arrow there. And here's 10 million, billion possible likelihood peripheralities where you didn't make it back home. The times when you made a different decision or when your body died from some reason, sometimes it's a conscious intellectual decision, sometimes it's a body decision. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, microbes came into my body and my immune system didn't figure out how to overcome those microbes and create antibodies and you died. Like, it's not always that you're a bad person or a good person, but please understand that your mind-body connection and your dance of your DNA are what determine the health of your body and whether you are on those peripheral timelines. Let me get to that. So that's the answer is in terms of just likelihood and probability. You have a 1, 2, uncountable number of possibilities that you will either stay alive infinitely, eternally, or die on the membrane of death. And so you have many, many more times that you died on the membrane of death and played wrong notes than that you stayed alive and played the right notes. Now let's get on to, so yeah, I also want to tell you, emphasize that wormhole at the top, the exit point, that wormhole is a very, very great unlikelihood. It's very, very tiny. It's like the eye of the needle. There's only a tiny little gap there, even though I draw it as a big giant opening like this. Imagine that it's the tiniest little space with my fingers almost touching, and only one thread-like timeline can possibly get through there. And your entire journey of consciousness as a soul in this refinery of souls is to get yourself going from this direction all the way up to here. And mostly what we do on our journey is to wobble. That sometimes the compass of you, your compass needle, is like, oh, I'm aligned with infinity, everything is great. Then you're like, oh, now I fell off track, now I'm going to die. But if I get myself back together, then I'm back. Like, you kind of wibble wobble. It's the wobbling of the chakras. There's nothing wrong with it. But ideally, what we have is a nice stable flight where you align with that central core timeline and stick with it. Like, you keep your instrument in tone, you stay in alignment with divinity. In part 2, I'll talk more about those characteristics, but you stay being that person. Now let's talk about what is it that determines the position of awareness. So now I got to do a share screen of everything that's on my screen. Okay, first of all, I need to clear this part out. You don't need to see that. And next, I'm going to clear out the chat. You don't need to see that. And now I'm going to show you a couple of different pictures. Let's start with this one, but let's also make sure that the DNA one is available. So first of all, understand that your DNA is not a flat, static object, as it is often presented down here in the lowest level. It is a chromosome. P.S. Watch your homework supplemental videos where you get to see supercoiling. This is not my drawing over here. It is a diagrammatic example of what supercoiling is. Supercoiling is taking DNA from its simplest thread-like singular form, wrapping it around histones, wrapping it around itself, turning it into larger and larger loops, which then crochet themselves together, which eventually converge into the familiar X or Y shaped chromosome shape. And I sent you videos that are from other people's work that show that process of twisting and twisting and twisting and coiling and coiling and coiling, how your DNA gets packed up in a suitcase in order to become a chromosome shape. So the first thing I need to talk about, so many different things. Wait, let me get a drawing picture and a color here. So first of all, this right here is a very special apparatus. I'm highlighting in blue this indigo chakra that really coincides at a place deep inside of your brain mind, deep inside of the glandular structure of your body. You can think of it as directly behind your nose or between your eyes. It's back in there. And it also feels like, to me, like it is at the top of your spine. So like, here's the spinal cord, here's the top of the spine where it kind of connects to the back of your skull, back here, back of your skull, you can kind of feel it. And I'm sending you telepathic broadcasts of what it feels like and what it's all about. And there is a pineal gland in there that is in between the two hemispheres. You have a bicameral or two-lobed mind, but then you have all of these interesting glandular structures that are in the median there, in the center there. And one of them is your pineal gland. Let's draw it very, very quickly. It is like an eyeball. It actually has a little branching structure of two nerves that move up to it. It has a retina back here, but it does not have an opening. Your regular eyeballs, of course, if you're familiar with having eyeballs, have an opening. That's your cornea and your lens, and usually light comes into it and then is projected onto the cornea, onto the retina, rather back there. But in the case of your third eye, your inner eye, your pineal gland, what comes into it is light that is projected into it in a non-physical sense, because it's at the deep center of your brain. So we're not talking about physical light going in there. Physical light goes in through these eyes. We're talking about non-physical light, light of pure consciousness, light of pure awareness, light of time. This eye over here, so let's draw, like, here's your eyeball. I hope you can see it properly on your screen over here. That represents your third eye or your inner eye. It is your eye of time. It is affiliated with Christ consciousness, but it is not part of a dogma of any church. Forgive me for constantly emphasizing that, because I don't want anyone to think, well, if I'm a Jewish person or a Hindu person or a non-affiliated, non-religious person, then therefore I cannot use my Christ consciousness if it is only for people who are believers in a particular teacher from 2000 years ago. Not to be lighthearted or to denigrate that person or their teachings or their believers at all. The answer is Christ consciousness is universal. It is for everyone. If you have a pineal gland, this consciousness is for you, and the teacher that is the master teacher of this realm is for you. Please do not ever think yourself out of school to be like, no, that's a school for someone else. It's not for me. No, it is for you. And it is also for other beings. It's for dogs. It's for cats. It's for redwood trees. It's for butterflies. It's for microbes. Each cell of your body has a connection to Christ consciousness. It is literally the aperture which you use to look down the road of time. So this time vortex represents multiple different time roads. Each one of these red lollipops represents a road of time. Ideally, as we have come here, we are supposed to have our eye of time fully activated and be able to see the array of timelines stretching out in front of us. Like, here's a timeline, here's a timeline, here's a timeline, here's a timeline. And these wheels that I'm highlighting over here, here, and here, kind of next to your ears, that is what determines, I'm going to move my head now on the screen, left or right. Which timelines are you looking at? Are you looking down this way in this periphery? Are you looking down this way in this periphery? This is literally what determines if you are going up the central core timeline to infinity, or if you're heading on one of these peripheral zones that's going to eventually lead you to the membrane of death. The real answer is that what determines if you are either on that central core timeline, going directly up and down, or slightly at askew, has everything to do with your thought structure, your belief system, your experience in the moment, and the dance of your DNA. So your DNA is not a flat, static object. It is constantly dancing. Although it is presented as a chromosome, the chromosome is the packed up version of it. That happens only during a very limited aspect of the cell's lifespan. Please access the recorded materials that I have for this, because I'm going a little fast, but I go over it in very infinite good detail. The life cycle of a cell and mitosis, which is when cells split apart and make a parent cell and a daughter cell. That is really the reason why DNA wraps up into its chromosome shapes, like getting into its suitcase, so it can then effectively split apart and be copied. It gets organized in that way. For the predominant majority of the lifespan of a cell, like if this is the outer cell membrane, then this is the nucleus, and the nucleus has a nuclear membrane that separates it from the rest of the cell. Inside of the cell's nucleus, mostly what you have is the genetic sweater completely pulled out. Like, all of the loops are pulled out. It's kind of like a big, giant, tangled ball of yarn. So the chromosome is what happens when you knit the genetic sweater up into its perfect sweater with armholes and head holes, and you can put it on its Christmas sweater. It's got a picture of Snoopy and a Christmas tree on the front of it. That's a chromosome. Most of the time, what you have are just vibrating strings that, like, here's some red, here's some green, here's some white, here's some blue. It is when it all gets tied together, it's the picture of Snoopy and the Christmas tree. When it is unfurled, it is called chromatin. I can write it down for you if you want me to. Chromatin is just the big, giant, undifferentiated mass. It's the library. So right now I'm going to draw a parallel between this eye of insight, eye of time, as your library card, the librarian, the great teacher, the master of masters, that is internal inside of each one of you. So there was a great teacher who lived 2000 years ago, was exemplified in an actual physical presence and walked around telling people things like, here's truth, please listen to me. There is also, so happy that Lucy is tuning in. There is also non-physically, on a purely energetic level, on a non-denominational, non-anthropomorphic, non-human level, the great teacher that is Christ consciousness, that is also a purely light-based, purely energetic presence that speaks any language that exists at all times, that exists predating that great teacher from 2000 years ago, and exists on all times and planes and in different places. Because what about if you lived on Mars? What about if you lived 10,000 years ago? What about if you will live in the future, all these different times and places? So please expand beyond the definition of just one teacher that is known in this time and place as Christ. And also, I know I'm moving fast, please understand there have been other avatars. Avatar from avatar, Sanskrit word meaning one who has come across the waters. So Jesus as being one avatar, one representative of Christ consciousness. Krishna being another representative, also affiliated with this area of the body, also having an indigo or blue color. Daganawida is from the Iroquois tradition. There are so many teachers also from the oral tradition. No problem at all, Lucy, welcome, thank you. Even if anybody has to tune in late, that's totally cool, and catch the archive too to catch up. Daganawida from the Iroquois tradition, to understand that there is a huge level of culture that has an oral tradition, not a written tradition. So Judeo-Christianity, written tradition. The Torah is over 5,000 years old, written language, holding the information of that particular culture. Our culture says, we value written language more than oral tradition, which would be a song that is sung in a culture, information passed down from grandmother to daughter to future generations in this way, the oral tradition of many native people. So please do not be culturally, what is it called, ethnocentric or focused in the understanding of your own culture, that you understand that there is Christ presence throughout all these different times and places, throughout all these different cultures. Again, not to overemphasize or de-emphasize either, or to devalue either of them, but just have to make this distinction that is made. The Christ presence is the needle of awareness. It is your teacher. It gives you information from the library of the cosmos. And I wanted to make a connection. The nucleus of your cells is also your connection to the library of the cosmos. So there's a connection between your DNA when it's completely unfurled, open and free, and it is making all of its wonderful movements, dance movements, arabesques. It twirls itself together. It dances in beautiful symmetries. It goes across like this. It spews itself out like ticker tape. It comes back together. All of those dance movements and the information that it represents itself is a divine connection to infinity and to the multiplicity of information that is pure abstract light intelligence information as it stands in the cosmos. So too is this needle of awareness, attenuos, from Greek attention, your tendril of awareness that sticks out, that is like the needle of awareness that plays on the record of your life. That teacher is like the library card that allows you to access all of the information that is held in reality. And then there's also a guide at the top of your head. So there's this, your eye, your library card. You can now access anything. I give you a library card, like you can now get any book you want to out of the great library of knowingness in the cosmos across all realities. That is super intimidating. As anybody knows, there's all this information available on the internet. What you need is an effective search engine, an algorithmic tool to help you to find the thing that you need in that moment. That is this, your crown, the connection to infinity, the connection to the source, the connection to the divine, the place where you plug in to that intelligence which is higher. And this turns your head this way, turns your head this way. This is like a compass needle. This is also part of the compass that turns your head and makes you look in a particular direction. This and its motion and the dance of your DNA, these are two things that are confluent within you, determine where you are in the time vortex. So if you are on the far periphery over here, it is because your thought structure, the way you have built your boat, your ship of thoughts, is making you fly or float in that direction. Your present song that you're singing or thoughts that you're thinking make you float in that direction. And your guidance about which pathway you are looking down and traveling and experiencing is making you go in that direction. I see thoughts as actual pathways. Neural pathways is a good way of thinking of it literally, but also non-literal in the sense of a time pathway. So as a time pathway, you could say, like, let's say across the bottom of your screen, moment number 1, moment number 2, moment number 3, moment number 4, moment number 5, onward into the rest of the day. But you can also think of these as consciousness pathways or thought pathways. Here's my thought where I'm starting out, and then here's my thought as I'm flowing along, like an old-fashioned analog record. I'm listening to Led Zeppelin. Here's the next song, here's the next song, here's the next song, and then moving on to the final song on the album. So each thought that you're thinking can be exemplified as a graphic pathway, and some of them lead to death. You understand? So there's lots of teachers, and I go over this in the recorded lessons, and I recorded my lessons like in 2013. So, but I think he's still a relevant teacher. Epigenetics and Bruce Lipton. This is the science integument bridge between, for people that need that bridge between materialistic knowing and non-materialistic, non-physical, experience. What makes your body cells act in a certain way, what makes you exemplify certain diseases, but other times exemplify health, what makes you do certain things in life. The answer is epigenetics. Like, I should write this all out. Epigenetics. Hold on a second. Go to the whiteboard so I can write this out. Hold on. Okay, so wait, the first word that I wanted to write out for you was chromatin. That is the name for when your DNA is unfurled, the sweater of your DNA is unfurled like a giant tangled ball of yarn in the center of your nuclei of all of your cells. It is called chromatin as opposed to a chromosome. The next one is a teacher named Bruce Lipton, who is worth looking into, and he teaches about epigenetics. Epigenetics, it means the code that rules the code, prefix epi, meaning a phenomenon within a phenomenon. So for example, an epiphyte is a plant like an orchid that grows on another plant. Epigenetics means the code that rules the code. So when blah, 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 when DNA was first discovered in the 1940s, 1950s, humans said, that's the thing I'm looking for. It's the deterministic factor that determines whether you have brown eyes or whether you have what color skin you have, or whether you're going to develop a disease and die. And everyone looked at it and was like, look, it's written in my DNA. It's going to happen no matter what. Like, wow, I'm a victim. I'm joking, of course. And I'm overacting. Wow, I'm a victim. I'm being facetious. No, then later on, scientists learned what you know is cosmic spiritual truth. You're not a victim at all. You exist with these potentialities, and that is everything about your thoughts, your feelings, which time road you are traveling down, which thought patterns and structures you choose to align with that determine whether or not you express the potentials you exist within you for disease or for health. The basic aphorism that I use for this is identical twins do not develop identical diseases. So sets of identical twins, they come from the same zygote, the same fertilized egg, same exact genetic potential, same puzzle pieces. They become two different people that move through time uniquely, and they use their puzzle pieces differently. This guy over here might get cancer. His identical twin over here might not get cancer. The answer as to why does this happen? Martine's question, what determines whether you are on the path of least likelihood or on one of these peripheral outer lying pathways that lead towards death, has everything to do with you, basically your willpower, what you are as a person, what you choose as a person, what you do with your potential. So this goes away from determinism, which is the sense that, well, someone else wrote this story for me. I'm just going through it and doing my thing and following the directives. It is all predetermined for me. This is also known as fate or fatalism, but I don't want you to think it all has to do with something being fatal. It's fated to happen versus profound free will. And I'm a proponent of profound free will, and freedom is one of those foundation building blocks of cosmic law that I exemplify and that I'm here to teach about and to rectify about. So please understand that everything in your body being, from the dance of your DNA and how it's moving and swirling and fitting together, the pathways that you choose to travel down with your mind, the way that your chakras are either canted angle or perfectly in alignment or wibbling wobbling somewhere between both of those states, which is what most of us experience, has everything to do with your free will and your willpower and your choices. And that the level of reality that I come from in my Aurora Collective is all about, like, when you exist at that level of reality, you really recognize everything is an emanation that I take responsibility with. I take responsibility for my emanations. I'm creating this reality. I'm creating these thought structures. I'm creating these potentials. I take radical self-responsibility. I'm accountable to what I create, even as I allow everyone else their particular freedom and their pathway to make their artistic choices, artistic mistakes in life, and then rectify. You make a mistake, you got to rectify. Like, I drew that. I'm drawing a person's face. I drew it all wrong. Get my eraser. That's not right. Erase it away, erase it away. So a great deal of what we're doing in terms of exploring the periphery of potentialities in the time vortex that are not what we really want to explore is the genetic eraser. Like, no, I didn't really want to go down that road. Sometimes I use the example of behavioral isms where you're like, do you make a choice? Turn left or turn right? If you turn left, you get creamed by a Mack truck and then you're dead and you're on the membrane of death and you're like, oh, I should have made a different choice. But sometimes it's different than that. Sometimes it's as subtle as I needed to think a different thought structure. Even the things that are taught to you in infancy and early childhood about the inevitability of death, the inevitability of chronological aging and decrepitude. We make a choice to internalize those teachings as they come from our parents or grandparents or other adult examples in our life. They tell you, like when you're like mommy, daddy, like, why does grandma look that way? Like, why does grandma's face look that way? Or why did grandma die? And why isn't she here anymore? And they teach you like, well, like, put your arm around your kid, like, well, this is aging is a thing. And one day you're going to age too. And one day you're going to fall over and die and be in your grave. And little kids, then they're like, I kind of understand. But then in that moment, there's a change and a shift in the genetic movement of that beautiful child's vibrating organism as they have been moving towards states of the inevitability of eternal life. They are then taught about death, and then they start to veer off into the gutter balls, the bowling balls that go towards the edge. Gutter ball. You didn't make a strike, you didn't make a spare, you went into the gutter. No offense, doesn't mean that you're a bad person, just means you didn't think in the right direction. Doing something like taking this class, listening to me, or listening to a teacher like Bruce Lipton, or listening to anyone that offers you the mental thought structure integument that allows you to say, even though this is programmed in by DNA or by social convention, I can write a new story and go in a new pathway. And a great teacher named Terence McKenna once used to have this lecture that he would say, culture is not your friend. And it's true. But human culture and the things that are taught to you as you're acculturated here are generally not your friend. They're generally limitation thought structures and things that are here that are diminishment tools. No offense. Not to sound just very negative about life, but it is our job or our joy in this moment of beingness, of being here to exemplify something different. I am here as Aurora, as a visitor, to exemplify something different. The body that I'm in was supposed to be dead 20 years ago. I'm like, no, I write a new story. I don't like that at all. I erase that out. How about living with neurological damage? No, I don't think that I like that story. I'll erase that out and I will write something else in my DNA. How about the inevitability of physical metabolic death? No, I definitely do not agree with that. So you could imagine that I'm erasing that out, or you could imagine that I am aligning my ship of my mind with a different possibility. Oh, my spine is getting straighter too. Did you guys see that? Now all of a sudden I'm 2 inches taller and I'm not going to die. And I feel these oscillations just between you and me throughout my whole entire day. And that's how I spend my practice, where I'm like, oh, like I'm feeling myself kind of falling over. I'm heading towards a gutter ball. And a lot of the time that makes my spine kind of go down. My shoulders go down. I feel more depressed. You can see my face changing. Everything about me is changing. Then I'm like, wait a minute, get myself back together. I start to think intentionally, like when you do a posture check or a posture correction, you're like, wait a minute, I'm going to move in this direction instead. I'm going to do this, and this instead. And it has everything to do with willpower. So the real answer to all of this is you are not fated to die, fated to suffer, fated to become old and decrepit, like whatever Miss Haversham from Knock on with the Wind, from Great Expectations, an old, or the Portrait of Dorian Gray. That's another really good one from literature. The man who was held, he was held in a youthful thrall by his magical portrait, but when the portrait was destroyed, he crumbled into blah, 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 blah. I'm being lighthearted and silly, but you understand with my overacting what I'm trying to portray. You are not meant to crumble into decrepitude and aging and death. What you are meant to do is be a supercomputer, do the calculations with your body being that lead you away from those peripheral timelines where you die and keep you on the eternal pathway of eternal life. And again, no offense to anybody that has a religion, a belief, a faith, or anything like that, but I take great issue with what I have defined as death cults that speak about and teach about the inevitability of death, death as a necessity for resurrection, death as a necessity for saviorship, death as a necessity on the pathway of life. No offense to anyone, because I know that that's big dogma that I'm poking, like I'm touching people's sacred cows when I say this. But in the most kind way, I want to bring to you a different, more positive program that you can internalize and live, which says that no, you do not have to die in order to go to heaven. I don't mean to sound blasphemous in doing this, but I very, very much mean to sound like life is a gift that comes from God, the divine presence, abstraction. It's a miracle. It's inexplicable that we even exist, that matter exists, that consciousness exists, and we're here and we're having this experience, and that maintaining life is a divine gift also, and something that I want to teach to others and that I exemplify myself. So keeping yourself alive, and we can sing that silly song, staying alive, but that's what it's all about, that you want to stay alive. Where there's life, there's hope, even if you're in like profound distress, stay alive because healing is real. But also on a very, not like, I get lighthearted and all of that. And also I have drank my coffee this morning, like actual caffeine. So that kind of makes me a little bit silly too, I know. But I find it kind of helps me to connect telepathically. I have more mind power to connect telepathically. So not to get into, usually I drink decaf and I'm not quite so silly. Staying alive as a divine gift, as a divine path, as opposed to the way that some religious dogmas present death as a noble sacrifice or a necessity on your pathway in order to then move towards something greater. You have to die and be destroyed in order to go to paradise or heaven. I feel that this is also, Terence McKenna has another really good teaching about your personal versus the planetary eschaton. That's ESCHATON, eschaton, meaning end of everythingness. Just look into that guy. I keep mentioning him today. He's really worth it, Terence McKenna. The teaching, like in the Bible, that says everything on earth is going to be wiped out by a firestorm or giant floods or something like that, like God's going to shake the Etch-a-Sketch. That's an old toy if you don't know that one. Shake the Etch-a-Sketch, clear it all away, and then start anew. And I think that even if you're not a religious person, many people have acculturated and attuned to this as a basic truth, that that's what has to happen. I'm trying to teach something very, very different, that is not what has to happen, that we can have a very, very different experience of continuation of consciousness, continuity of experience, where instead of dying a physical metabolic death, you might change, transform, metamorphosize, you might shift your timelines, you might enter a very different level of reality or mind created experience, but you don't have to have a physical, literal death where your body dies and then worms crawl in and out of your nose and play pinochle, and then you finally get to go to heaven or paradise. That you can have a different type of experience that is a redefining of your pathway through time. That is what this actually is. In level 2, I'm going to talk more about this too. Time vortex as refinery of consciousness. But before I get there, I want to talk to you about your peripheral selves. In your eyeballs, you have your retina, and you have 2 of them. Your retinas have a focal point, that is the fovea. That's where you have the most rods and cones as receptors. It's where you receive most of your information. It's your focal point, where it's analogous to the needle of awareness, the focal point of your mind. It is analogous to your connection to time. You see clearly, biologically, in the center of your vision. So everyone who is a sighted person who's here in my class, I just invite you, like if you're looking at the screen or you're looking at me, don't look to the left or the right, but pay attention to what's on the periphery. Like you can wave your fingers over to the left and right, like, oh, like I see my fingertips waving just a little bit. You just see a little bit of information from the left and right. You don't necessarily see every single thing, every single bit of the fingerprints that are on your fingertips as you just see movement, generalized form. It's in the biological evolutionary terms of the development of our actual eyeball apparatus. It is just meant to be something that picks up movement. Like I saw it out of the corner of my eye, and then I knew that something was coming after me. That is similar to the peripheral cells on the edges of the time vortex. Those are in your eye of time, the experience of your mind moving through time. Those are peripheral pathways, not the focal point of your experience. And they're meant to give you a peripheral sense of generalized information, like don't go in that direction, don't go in that direction. That's boring or that's dangerous. Stay focused on your path. And that's where the real information and higher intelligence and let's say high value signal is. Low value signal is kind of like a few words, dribs and drabs, nothing that really matters, nothing that's really too important or informative. But then if you stay focused on this narrow beam here, that's the quote unquote radio station or broadcast of intelligence from the cosmos, where you get the real teaching, where you get the real meat and potatoes, the real nourishment, I should say, the real guidance from higher intelligence, the real organizational principle. So, okay, let's talk about overlapping areas of coincidence. I know I'm going fast. I have a lot to get through, and I always encourage everyone, access the real teaching, not real teachings, but access everything that's on Teachable, because I get into so much detail and I feel like there's even only so much that I can do here in class. But I'm going to draw overlapping time vortices. Here's one person's timeline and life and infinity life. Let's call that person Mr. or Ms. Green, or undifferentiated person Green. And let's call this person over here Mr. or Ms. Purple. Wait, let me just make them overlap a little bit more, so you can really see what I'm talking about. There we go. Mr. or Ms. Purple. And the first thing that you have to, oh, it's so hard to control this pen sometimes. I complain, and when I complain, I go over into the gutter, like I'm moving to the membrane of death now because I'm complaining. Get happy. Okay, I'm so happy now. I'm back in line with infinity. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the idea that this central core timeline that moves to infinity does not overlap with this guy's central core timeline that moves to infinity. So the real truth is that when this person is over here ascending and moving through the wormhole, and this person is over here ascending and moving through the wormhole, they are not in the same realities. They do not have an area of coincidence. Coincidence does not mean something that is stupid or happenstance. It is literally math talk for something that coincides, comes together. The area of coincidence is the area where I am presently scribbling in black. It is the area where purple and green come together, and there are overlapping timelines in those places. So let's do purple overlapping timelines here, and then green overlapping timelines here. I know it's not perfect, but you're getting what I'm talking about. Just taking a few moments to make this kind of clear for you. So this is a good example. The green timeline, where I'm making like a big heavy mark over here. This green person died at this moment, and that timeline overlaps or is very close to the purple timeline that is this person's ascension pathway that continues onward, 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 because here we have the membrane of death, a boundary. What that means is that their time, according to this diagram, this time road only overlaps with this time road up until this point. They occupied the same reality. Maybe that's up to age, whatever, 17 and a half. The green guy lived until 17 and a half and overlapped in the same reality as the purple person, and then their timelines diverged. And the purple person's consciousness did continue onward, but did not occupy an overlapping place in reality as the green person. Now I draw your attention, just erase a few things. Don't erase, 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 erase one more time, erase. Over to here. This is the other place where you see, here is the central core timeline of the green person, their ascended master version of self. And then here, this heavy black line is the purple person. That's when they lived until be like 17 3/4. And then they died. So this is really more of a philosophical, graphic representation, understanding of what death is. Hold on a moment while I drink a little bit. Hold on, so sorry, I get like very excited. Very excited, and my throat is very dry when I do so much talking. These overlapping areas are where you have shared experience with other people. Same thing with animals, pets, even, you know, redwood trees or something like that. And that when you experience death, what you're really experiencing is the refocusing of the pathway of awareness of each of these organisms. So I used to use as the example, you know, my beautiful cat. I used to have a cat named Miss Ashley. And for this many years, we overlapped. And then at a certain point, she died in my reality. Her version of self, that is her ascended master version as a cat. Yes, it exists as a cat, as a dog, as a butterfly, as a redwood tree. Think of it as ascended master equals divinely perfected persona. And we'll get into that in level 2. But all organisms have that as a potential. It is baked into who you are. It is inevitable that it will be reached. It's just a question of how much refinement of the soul refinery do you need to go through. So my beautiful cat, that I was, of course, very in love with and attached to, got refined in this direction. The pen of her consciousness went like in this direction. And what that meant is that at a certain point, as I was refining in this direction too, our pathways separated. And although we walked together as travelers who had an area of coincidence overlapping for a certain number of years, at a certain point, her ascended master timeline, she went over here and I went over here. In my reality, she died. I stayed alive. In her reality, she stayed alive and I died. Maybe I went out for cat food one day and got hit by a Mack truck on the road and never came home. And she stayed alive and ended up learning and growing from that experience, what it was like to lose me. She died. I stayed alive in my reality. I ended up learning and growing from that grief and loss. In peripheral vision, we receive signals from the far edges of our consciousness. We can also receive signals from the far edges of someone else's consciousness who has passed on, who has died, who is no longer in the same reality as you. I got tons of message, love, guidance, and things like that from my kitty cat. And then I'll also, let me drink a little bit more. I have a beautiful friend from back when I lived in Woodstock, a person, a physical human person. And she died, you know, like in her 30s or 40s, like way too young of cancer. And I get tons of love and protection and nourishment and guidance from her. That's my friend Runa, that she is on the periphery in terms of my timeline, like talking to me from the sides over here, not areas of coincidence, but I still get tons of signals from there, tons of love coming to me. So that's the real answer. And I know when you're in grief, like when I lost my cat, when I lost my friend, I was very, very sad. I was not like, oh, like it's all okay. Like that would be sociopathic. You have to feel your feelings. When you lose someone, when your timelines diverge, the grief and loss is very, very real. So don't just go into philosophy and be like, everything is fine. Everything is not fine. Grief and loss are real. And you feel your feelings. It's just like, oh, like I'm crying so much. But please understand that on a more philosophical level, and after you process your grief and your feelings, and now it's been many, many years since I've lost both of them, now I'm able to feel more the miracle or the philosophical, you know, perspective of understanding that to their perspective, I'm the one who died. Like my friend who lived in Woodstock, I moved away and then she died. But to her perspective, she stayed living in Woodstock and I moved to California, I died. Maybe I died, whatever. Like I just always say, hit by a Mack truck on the highway, but our areas don't coincide anymore. But when I'm thinking of her and I'm, you know, talking with her or like sending positive energy to her, she would experience that as the passed on version of me sending love and things like that over to her. So just understand that these are reciprocal viewpoints, that as you are going in your own ascended journey, you are focusing away from these other organisms that are actually aspects of self. My cat is an aspect of self. My friend was an aspect of self. All of you guys are aspect of self, and I am an aspect of yourself. And that's what, there's an ancient Mayan greeting about that that says, hello, shard of my soul. You are a shard of my soul. That's a basic philosophical truth. But then it also must be tempered with, of course, the understanding of reality, because you don't want to over-identify with other people and their journeys. You want to have strong boundaries, even as your inner eye begins to awaken and you see everyone and everything as a shard of yourself. Please also have strong inner boundaries of appropriateness, because otherwise it'd be like, shard of myself, like here, like have access to my bank account, have everything, like I'll have nothing, you'll have everything. You can't do that. So it's balance, but it is the understanding that all of these other life presences are shards of your own fractal consciousness, facets of your own being. This is actually a gem, a much larger gem, like a crystalline structure. That is what Christ is. That's what I should say when I'm talking about non-denominational Christ. It is a crystalline structure, like a refractor. Wait, let me just grab this. It's a crystalline structure. It has multiple facets on it. Each facet is a life, a lifetime, a lifespan, a life vortex, and that your experience is being reflected, your consciousness being reflected and refracted in all of the other, your light that is being refracted by all of these other facets of being, and you are bouncing around inside of this crystal, and this crystal is literally your Christ presence that is within you, and it connects on a network of Christ presence to all these other organisms that include cats and redwood trees, and that it might be too much even for an embodied human mind to know and understand, because it requires such grand perspective. Sometimes it can just be like, wah, 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 too much to know. But it's a lot to process in the moment, but just know that that is the cosmic truth. But when you lose someone, you just can't be always in cosmic truth. The heart truth also really matters, because understand, like the tears and the grief are real, and that's also part of the soul refinery experience. I'm going to wrap up lesson level 1 because I need to get to level 2, but I also know that there's questions, and I'll answer the questions that are relevant while they're relevant. Oh, iPhone says, thank you for this teaching, Aurora, much needed. Good. Thank you so much. So I haven't missed out very much on anything, but if you have questions on level 1, put them in the chat now, so I'll answer them while they're relevant. Hopefully. We just drink a little bit more. Thank you for understanding. You're in a soul refinery. You're not in a torture room. You're not in a purgatory punishment, even though sometimes I'm laughing. Oh, I'm not stupid, but we have to sometimes be lighthearted about this. It can feel torturous because you're like, oh, I have to do this again. Oh, suffering again. Try it again. Like, I'm doing my piano scales. Wrong note. Try it again. Or the math homework. No, wrong. Go back. Wrong division is wrong. Try it again. It's not supposed to be a torture factory. It is supposed to be a soul refinery. And part of how we learn on the soul journey, or how our soul is refined, is by going through these grief and loss experiences. It is the understanding intellectually of the value of grief and loss. Let me just rewind, and I'll tell you very briefly, but I'll do this more in another time. I remember a time that is the antediluvian time. That's when I, as my Aurora presence, actually lived on Earth. I didn't mostly live on Earth during this time of mortality. I lived on Earth, or in this world, on this planetary structure, during a time before death was invented. So in this time vortex, usually now people are slumped over to the side and then have to go through the soul refinery and get to the middle and then finally get through the wormhole. But I come from and remember a time when everybody got through the wormhole. And death never existed, and nobody ever threw a gutter ball in bowling. Oh, sorry for the loud barking. My dog gets so excited when someone comes home. No one ever had a gutter ball. Can you imagine a game of bowling like that? Like everybody, like score 10 million. Nobody ever has a gutter ball. It's a very different way of experiencing life and the life plan and everything like that. We never had grief and loss. A different time. It is a time before death was invented. So our time of mortality now, or level of dimensionality of mortality, we might remember that time as a mythological time of being immortals, the time of the immortals, the time when we walked as gods, when we were similar to gods, when we did not have mortality and we had a different level of experience, and it did not involve the soul refinery of understanding, experiencing, and exemplifying grief and loss. But now we have that. Now we have the seasons of reality, winter, spring, summer, fall. We have daytime, nighttime, diurnal, cycles of life is what I'm trying to say. We have life cycles, cycles of life, multiple lifetimes across realities, and we grow through experiencing the loss of people that we are connected to and that we love. And also understand that at the end of this journey, when I tell you about this I am God moment, when you come out through the wormhole and you connect over here, and you're actually connecting with all of these other vectors. Vectors means lines of force of yourself, fractal, refracted, crystalline versions of reality, of you coming from different directions, being bounced through time and space and consciousness from different directions. This whole entire dandelion seed head all converges at the middle, with all of these consciousnesses having that aha moment. I'm God. I remember I'm God. And you're all coming together. That's that moment of reconnection. So everyone that you've ever loved and that you have lost, people who have gone on their journey, there's no longer an area of coincidence, and people from history that don't exist anymore, they all converge to that convergence point. So let me just scroll through a little bit more. Let me do, oh my goodness, I have to talk about so much more of this. Okay, wait. Before I go into level 2, because this level 1 stuff is important, I want to emphasize that this apparatus, go to the pictures here, this apparatus of your inner eye, your eye of time, rests upon, here, let me dip the notation here, rests upon the vortex of greenery that is from your heart. So here's your eye of time over here, and you can see where I'm highlighting blue. That's where one of these chakra wheels rests upon, let me get green. This is green, which is the color for unconditional love from your heart. So here's a big giant spiral of unconditional love in your heart. And it makes this amazing vortex shape that comes outward from your heart that creates kind of like a spiral platform within which your apparatus of your library card and your librarian sit upon that structure of your heart. And your heart, it is exemplifying unconditional love. It is exemplifying the love tone, my piano's not on, love tone. That's this, because when it gets going, it makes an actual tone like la, la. And that's a tone that happens when you are synchronized with time perfectly. There's friction, a frictionless state in your mind, a nonverbal frictionless state, and also acceptance. You're making the tone of acceptance. I accept everything. I accept everything. And that in that acceptance, you can receive the information that comes from the eye of insight. Acceptance is literally like having an open heart through which information and energy can flow. So it's necessary to cultivate as a prerequisite before you matriculate to the cosmic university and get your university library card and start getting cosmic assignments from the librarian. First, you have to do your prerequisite, and that is be able to create that love tone, get into a meditative state, be able to create that stable, harmonic vibration that is kind of like a whirling vortex of love energy upon which your voice, insight, and higher connection, crown consciousness all sit like an apparatus and kind of turn to the left, turn to the right, and are held in a gyroscopic stability moving through time. You create love tone, your eye of insight rests upon that love tone. You get information from your cosmic library connection, and that information strengthens your heart. So that means that at first you have to have a strong sense of acceptance to be able to see this information that's going to come to you, that is insightful information that might be challenging to have that level of information. You might see things about reality that are like, you have to have a lot of acceptance, practice acceptance, to learn things about other people, to learn things about the world, to see the world clearly and not be in judgment. Judgment would be closing down your heart. Like, I don't like what I see. I close it down. I'm gonna close down that. That's inconvenient to see that. I'm just gonna close that on down. Like, oh, I don't want to see that about that person or about that situation or about that anything. It is a real practice to stay in compassion, which is a heart resonance, stay in love and acceptance as you are reading the book of consciousness, as this information comes to you. Part of it is being non-judgmental, like not saying like this should or should not be. How do you cultivate this presence? Getting out of judgment. So when I recorded these lessons, it was 2012, 2013. I'm far along on my journey, but when I was then, the person that I was then struggled a lot with non-judgment because I had a lot of senses of like right and wrong. This is right, this is wrong. That guy over there is doing something wrong. And I used to grumble inside of myself all the time, like that guy's doing something wrong. He's this and he's that, blah, blah, and that's wrong. Like a lot of like finger pointing, the inner critic looking at other people in that way, until I started to realize that in order to rise higher, I needed to get out of judgment. Doesn't mean that you throw your values out the window. It just means that you recognize, yes, there is positive behavior, there is negative behavior, and these things both exist, but to get out of the judgment of it and into the acceptance of it. I know the words on the anthropomorphic level sometimes belie the true meaning. There's distortion on the anthropomorphic level because none of this is a free ride. It doesn't mean like, yes, like be a jerk and I won't say anything about it. No, but unconditional love. Wait, I need to drink. Unconditional love has everything to do with saying, I recognize the jerkliness of that person over there and I accept it. And imagine as you get pure insight, you start to see a lot of things. You start to see the truth of people's diseases, the origins of their soul perturbations and bad things that they've done and problems that are inside of them. You see it, you understand it, you perceive it, and you perceive it inside of yourself, and you perceive it with compassion. That is what the compassion practice is. And you also start to see it in its contextual relevance. And the more that you see and the more that you have perspective and contextual relevance, the stronger your love and acceptance becomes. And this is a wonderful practice. And it is part of soul growth and soul refinement as you're on your journey. Learning to control your spirit eye. That's this, learning to control the needle of awareness. If I don't like the songs of reality that I'm playing, how do I control this eye? It has everything to do with meditation. Instead of being like, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here. Then I think this, and I think this, and I think this. That's what most people's minds are like, out of control. And that's also like the very young, immature, or uncultivated mind. Nothing bad or wrong with it, just needs muscle power in order to say, I am thinking in this direction, I am going in this direction. And at a certain point, you do become, you have a great deal of fortitude, as my spine goes upward, a great deal of inner structure, a great deal of coherence. In part 2, I'm going to talk about becoming a coherent light being, and I'm just about to hop into that. But you become more coherent instead of my light beams are all over the place, and I'm thinking this, I'm thinking this, I'm thinking this. My eyes, I'm looking over here, I'm looking over here, here. You become instead focused like a laser. This is going to come up more in part 2. So inner silence is a big part of that, meditative inner silence. And another part is to understand, like I've said, the solar plexus in the yellow level of language and implanted mind is largely a hacked human operating system. Listen to the stuff that I've recorded for lesson 3 because I talk all about it. But basically, there are backdoors, just like software backdoors. If Microsoft releases some kind of an update for your computer, like, yes, you can have Microsoft emails, but we're going to have a backdoor. That means Microsoft, the company, is going to be able to get in there past your password, read everything you're writing, or even change your documents, or do some editing, handy editing now of something that we might want to take out or not let you have. That is the definition of language and the human operating system. None of this is native to humans. All of this is implanted from otherworldly, higher dimensional extraterrestrial creatures that have modified humanity. You've been genetically modified many times. The implantation of language structure is unnatural. Meditative practices to move past those implantations are, in a way, unhacking the hacks or reclaiming yourself as an individual and reclaiming your true mind, which is your eye of insight. This crystalline structure, this crystalline faceted understanding and who you are is beyond verbalization. It's pure telepathy. That means you can use it to talk with a person from China if you do not speak Chinese and you are English, a butterfly if you don't speak butterfly. Butterflies speak with pheromones. P.S. Like you can't even smell what they are saying. I can't even smell you. Like I can't even smell what you're saying. Talking with dogs, talking on a microbial level. How about this? Talking on the level of a galactic star being that lives for billions of years. All of this is about the telepathy of your true mind beyond the implantation of your yellow level, verbalized mind, human anthropomorphic thought that is very limited and also very accessible to those who wish to suppress human consciousness. Let's talk a little bit also. I'm going fast through my notes and everything because I want to get to level 2, but access the recorded information. Your third eye is like a steering wheel in your car. It steers you along the pathways in time. And it is also your imagination. And your imagination is not just something silly, like it might be presented when you're a little child, like imagining something, and some adult in your life will say, don't worry about that. That's just your imagination, or that's silly, or that's dumb. Like you're just imagining things, or whatever. You have an experience and you go to the doctor and the doctor says, it is just your imagination. It's a way of invalidating your presence, basically. Imagination is not something silly or ephemeral or inconsequential. It is everythingness because it is imagination that imagines you down certain timelines. The way that you experience a reality is by imagining yourself in that reality. You imagine yourself with your car driving down those timelines of reality. So if you wish to imagine realities where you do not have cancer and you are healthy and you live your life beautifully, you imagine that with your mind and drive down those roads. If you imagine yourself, having diseases or chronologically becoming decrepit and then falling over and dying in your grave, then you will similarly go down those roads of time. I already got about epigenetics and the cell cycle. And what I also want to say is that your DNA is constantly dancing. The dance and movements of your DNA have everything to do with which road of time you are dancing down. And the dance movements of your DNA are also highly influenced by, let's say, your emotional tone. So music is a big way to get down a different time road. You meditate, control your mind, stop looking and thinking on all sorts of different directions, buckle down, listen to the inner teacher, be guided by, this crown chakra and the master teacher inside. And also I make music and I listen to music as a way of getting out of certain mind states and into better mind states. You know that you can listen to music and feel like so much better. Like I listen to that song and I feel so much better. Or sometimes if you are feeling sad or depressed, you can get the homeopathic remedy, listen to a sad, depressing song, take a little bit of that in, cry it out, and then be like, like I had that cathartic release and now I feel so much better. And also I'm not alone. Someone else is similarly like they hugged me with their song. I'm connecting with them. They felt as bad as I did at one point. And I've had comfort from a lot of songs and songwriters and people. And then sometimes they've passed on and I still feel them in their music. So that's another thing of like, whatever, anybody like who might have inspired you through their music, they have died, their music remains, but they're over here on a different timeline where they're still alive, but they're talking to you through their music. That's another big one. Their life presence reverberates through their achievements of what they did in life, the books they wrote, paintings they left behind, music that they made, and you can connect with them and their life living presence even as they are occupying a different dimensional reality. Know and understand about that. And the last thing I want to talk about is mind as an antenna. That this is like your antenna and your DNA is also an antenna, and it literally aligns you with certain reality broadcasts. So now we're moving beyond even the idea of keeping your own body healthy. I'm going to keep my body healthy. I'm going to think thoughts that are about staying young and staying healthy and not hitting the membrane of death and no gutter balls for me. What about out there? Like that crazy effed up world that's so, whatever, distressing, and all these bad things are happening and everything like that. The answer is your mind, your imagination, and your DNA are both an antenna, something that both sends and receives. And it puts you on certain timelines, on certain levels of reality that you're aligning with. It's beyond just aligning with somatic cellular health, which is huge for your own body. It is aligning with possibilities of the larger presence. And in understanding this, you can be completely about self-accountability and self-responsibility. You don't have to be any of this like, well, I'm great in my body, but they're effed up out there. You can say, wait a minute, that I am aligning with the reality that out there is effed up because of thought structures and expectations and things that are inside of me. And that if I want to align with a different contextual reality, I take accountability for what is inside of me and basically what reality broadcasts I want to be a part of. You have your hand up, or you're just giving me a thumbs up that you're agreeing with me. So I want to make sure if anybody has any questions that I respond while it's still relevant. Cool, wonderful. Thank you for that affirmation. So the idea is radical self-accountability, radical self-responsibility. That also speaks to the idea of expecting a catastrophe. Like, do you have to be on a planet where everything dies in a firestorm, is whisked away, then in order to be able to usher in a paradise, as you know, it is spoken about in the end of the Christian Bible. This is why I take issue. Okay, we're going to get to your question. Hold on a second. That's why I take issue with some of those teachings of the Christian Bible, Book of Revelation, the idea of everything dying in order to have this renewal, even though it's a beautiful allegory. I think that it in many ways can be unhealthy, that it leads to people aligning with the broadcasts of a reality that are about death and catastrophe, as opposed to creating and aligning with the reality structures of a place where, yeah, no, we didn't have to have rivers of lava, a lake of fire. We didn't have to have a cometary destruction path or any of those. Those things all exist. If you want to be on those timelines, they all exist. But we have also moved as a collective past those nodes. Let's do this. Here was 2015. Oh, CERN was going to blow everything up. We moved past that node. We avoided it. Then there was another, there have been, like, you get your punch card, like, I survived this apocalypse, I survived this apocalypse, this one, catastrophe, 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 my multiple punch card. But every time we aligned differently. So now we're on this reality. There's pandemic. Oh, there's going to be piles of corpses in the street. We have aligned past that possibility. It is not like the Black Plague death of the 1300s, where everyone was dying so much they stacked them up like firewood in the streets. It is not like that. Pardon me, I don't mean to sound insensitive for anyone who has been sickened or killed in the most recent outbreak of disease on our planet, but it was feared to be mass deaths and die-offs, and that's what people thought it was going to be. There are certainly those realities that you can align with in terms of your antenna, and we're not on those timelines. Hooray, we are getting closer and closer to the collective soul refinery, divine timeline, where we will not have to have catastrophes and lava and corpses everywhere, zombie apocalypse. And of course, I'm being facetious with my voice, so that you know that they're real fears. I don't mean to make fun of anyone who's concerned about those things, but I make light of them so that you can feel we made it past those things. We didn't die. We're not dead on the highway. I didn't get hit by that Mack truck. Hooray, I'm here. I'm still alive. Celebrate that you're still alive, please. And continue with the expectation. Well, we've avoided all of those catastrophes. Now there's another a comet, an asteroid. What's the next thing that's heading towards us? You're going to survive that too. Okay, let me get to questions. I still have a couple of things that I didn't get from level 1 because it's always so packed, but I got almost all. I got almost all of everything that I wanted on there. Let me get to Lucy's question. Okay, Lucy says, I need some help understanding. Are we simply on one timeline now and we communicate with others on their timelines, or are we able to touch all of our past timelines? What a great question. You occupy one timeline at a time. However, the timeline that you're on right now exists as an implication. You have an implied path, all the stuff in the past that led you to this moment now. And then branching forward from this moment now, you have a field. You don't just have one road that goes in front of you. You have a whole vast array, like all of my fingers are timelines, that you can go in all these different directions. And every single timeline has branching nodes where it's like, and then I chose to wake up and get a cup of coffee, but then I chose not to get a cup of coffee. And then in all of these branching, ever finer realities. But there's, it's a continued level of finer and finer branching, but know that it is all leading up to that culminative experience. So a lot of the branching is happening to the left and the right. In level 2, I'm going to talk about this even more. So I think you'll get even more of an idea. So wait, hold on one moment. I'm just going to press pause. I'm back. This is level 2, the advanced stuff, lesson 2. And this is all about the shape of time and ascended mastery and how these two things relate to one another. So now you can start to see how the level 1 presentation in its basics then morphs into and relates to the level 2 stuff in terms of oh, good, Rainbow Body. First of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. So good to see you again. And they say that I just answered their questions. That's good. Maybe you were telepathically asking. Sometimes I anticipate in that way. Talking about the time vortex and ascended mastery. So when I'm talking about the time vortex, it's that same shape that I was just drawing in level 1, and I can draw it out again. Let's draw, please. Clear out this stuff and start anew. Time vortex. Each one of these timelines goes up in this direction and then culminates in the last moment of your life. This is, of course, just to reiterate, these are spiral pathways, but because it would be very confusing if I drew a million spiral pathways, I draw them as straight lines like lollipops, but you know that they actually are spirals. And each one of these lines is like the quote unquote math equation of your life that culminates in this moment here. And you could also say that that moment contains the implied trajectory of all of these other moments that brought you to that moment. All of the decisions, behavior patterns, and everything else that was a factor that led you to this final moment that is a bubble of reality. And what we can even do, if I have all of these lines that are going up like this, that are timelines that terminate, that end in the membrane of death over here, what I can do is I can simplify the equation by erasing all of these guys out and then just having the final these guys over here. So you understand that the membrane of death is literally comprised of all of these last moments that are like the frozen moment of you, the moment when you are a bug splatting on the windshield of life. You're stuck in that last final moment of death, but it is not you there eternally. So just as I was speaking about, here's your nucleus of your cell, here's your outer membrane of your cell, and here where I'm making a red squiggle, that's the chromatin being the unfurled sweater of your DNA. Each one of these versions of yourself here is like a sweater, but you knitted it not exactly right. You knitted it and dropped a few stitches, and it's kind of a little bit crooked and doesn't fit quite right in the sleeves. So in order to do the next loop and the next loop and the next loop, what happens is you unfurl the genetic sweater. So this one over here gets turned into a ball of yarn. Sorry, I should say the sweater presence. That's perfect. That's imperfect. Change my words again. The imperfect knitted or crocheted sweater gets turned into a ball of yarn and returned to the beginning. Here's a ball of yarn that's just chromatin. And then it moves through time, gets knitted into a sweater, but that was not quite the right sweater. That was not quite right. Goes back to the beginning. We unfurl it again. It's the same yarn, but you keep on going through time in these loops within one lifespan, trying to get the sweater right. And when you get to this timeline over here, this is the infinitely heavy bowling ball of your consciousness. And it is moving in this direction. Try to get my pen working properly through the membrane of death. That is the correct sweater. Should I draw a little sweater? I don't know if I can do it. Here's the sweater that actually looks good, that actually fits, and that has a perfect knitting pattern in it and looks really, really good. Another way of thinking about all of this is the way that a ship on the ocean or a plane as it is flying through the atmosphere creates a V-shaped wake behind it. So here's a plane or a ship. It's flying or sailing in this direction through a fluid medium, and it leaves behind it a waveform. It's called a wake that kind of spreads out in a V shape like this. The actual vector or movement and direction of the impulse is what creates the wake. And that is what I want you to think of in terms of time and the creation of the time vortex. This is your ship of consciousness. It is flowing in this direction through the medium of time. And as it flows in that direction, it creates these peripheral presences. The peripheral presences exist as distortions or diminishments of your core persona. This persona over here is the real you. And when I say the real you, it is your divine presence. Let me read, because I wrote this down. Basically, you have multiple versions of you. And your higher consciousness self is like a boat that is leaving its wake through time. And your eternal self, the spark of you that is divine, the true you, it's your I'm looking for the exact words here. Oh, hold on a minute. It's you when you are directly aligned with God. When your persona, when your ego persona is God, and when you are living as God. Like sometimes I enjoy the way that I like the way that I said it in the video, and I wrote it down for myself so I could say that again. So once again, this infinitely heavy bowling ball moving in this direction through time, the person that you are on that timeline is you as God. It is you in your eternal persona, your eternal ego. The stuff that's over here to the left and the right, those are your temporal persona. Temporal meaning only who you are when you're submerged in time, not eternal. And this is big and speaks to the idea of what is an ascended master? Because this being, this version of you here is yourself as an ascended master. And an ascended master is not some boring, flat, characterless, no personality presence. It is a very, I'll go to my face, back to my face. It is a very real, very flavorful, unique, individuated presence, because this comes to the idea of that dandelion seed head, or many, many multiple converging vectors of God presence from different directions, all coming together back to the source, having that aha moment, I am God, but I am God from this direction, and I am God from this direction, or back to the crystalline structure of refracted light that is coming from all of these different facets, from all of these different levels of consciousness that are all converging and being refocused back together. And that all of these beams of light are you, but they are you coming from different directions and having its own unique flavor or set of characteristics. So in that time vortex, this is a soul refinery. As one experiences the periphery, the purely temporal self, you're experiencing the parts of you that are defined as you, defining your experience just when you're in time, just when you're submerged in time. And that's very, very different than the eternal version of you. The eternal version of you, I have to say this because sometimes people think an ascended master is like, oh, like a boring person, like a person like with like a blank face, like, just like flavorless, I don't know, like an angelic presence, just kind of being like, la. But this just comes down to it. Like, can an ascended master have attitude? Can they even like use naughty language or something like that? Do they have unique ideas and feelings? And what are they like? What are ascended masters like? How would an ascended master act? The answer is yes, yes, yes to all those things. But an ascended master is the divine version of you. This is the important thing. Your fingerprint is unique to you. Your genetic structure is unique to you. And your time trajectory, is unique to you. That means you were born in a particular time and place, and you're moving through your time vortex that is different than anybody else's time vortex. And the end result of the equation of you leading to divine perfection, therefore, must be a unique solution to the question of time that is referential to your own position in time. So the equation for someone else is not a one-size-fits-all equation that then fits onto you because you're from a slightly different angle. You're refracting from a slightly different facet of the crystalline structure. So you need to solve the equation of you in this soul refinery. Learn the lessons that are exactly right for you to right your ship and be going in this direction in this way, so that you have your aha, I am God moment, so that you become the version of you that is the divine version of you. And that it's not about trying to imitate others that we know from a historical record or from an oral record who are great teachers, who are master musicians, master magicians too, of reality. They did it, like they ran the marathon, they did it, they did that thing, they became a coherent light being. But your innate recipe, your innate running of the marathon is going to be different than them. So I'm talking about this, becoming a coherent light being. So first of all, I talked about the wake behind a ship, behind something that flies through a fluid medium. The next thing I want to talk about is a cone of light. So if you just have regular light waves, like a flashlight, you have the beam of the flashlight here, and then it spreads outward, goes outward. It can go like out in a cone. You've seen that, I'm sure, when you're walking along at night. You have the flashlight here, and then you have a beam of light that goes out in front of you and goes to the left and the right. It's disorganized light. It spreads out and it dissipates, as opposed to a coherent light structure. Coherent light goes up and down, up and down, up and down. All the peaks and all the troughs fit together. And you become a coherent light being when you are an ascended master, when you have a coherent light body. Now I'm going to talk about what is a laser. I have to draw. So a laser, this is a mirror over here. I'm drawing it through the magic of perspective. And this is another mirror over here. I'm drawing it through the magic of perspective. And this mirror over here has a little tiny dot opening through it. This is literally how a laser is made. And it's usually inside of a box that keeps out other regular forms of light. And because lasers are in our world right now, they're normal. Like you have laser pointers, you have lasers in the little grocery store scanner that scan your UPC codes. How does a laser work? How does it function? How does it make a beam of coherent light come out of this place over here? And coherent light means, here I'm drawing, all of the ups are in unison with all the downs. All the peaks and all the troughs fit together. This is coherent light. What happens is you have an impulse of light that bounces back and forth between these mirrors. And as it bounces back and forth, it becomes more and more and more organized, until at a certain point, I'm going to erase all the disorganized pathways. At a certain point, all of the light is in harmony, in unison, going like this. And the only thing that light can do is go through that wormhole in this direction and then come out in this direction. It's your laser pointer or the scanner at the grocery store. This is how light is actually organized in our physical world into a laser beam. This is the organization of light as intelligence, being organized through this refinery of consciousness or refinery of soul presence, until it leaves through this little aperture here, which is just like, which is just like this little aperture that's over here in the laser diagram, and where all of your consciousness, your genetic sweater, becomes coherent. That is what it is to become an ascended master. So, this is just like when I talk about achieving coherence in your heart. Let me just drink a little bit more. Thank you for understanding. When you become coherent in your heart and you create that field of love tone, like you're resonating with time itself, your giving and your receiving is equal. All of that was considered to be like the greatest pinnacle of achievement, but I'm telling you that's just the prerequisite for matriculating to the higher dimensions and getting this apparatus running. Same thing with being able to be coherent and go through that wormhole. All of the other pathways in your life do not lead to that level of freedom and continued eternal existence. The versions of yourself are on the periphery, temporal, meaning defined only by your experience in time, and sometimes wildly distorted from your true characteristics. Your true characteristics are those characteristics that lead you up the center of that graphic depiction of time, and that also are who you are when you are God. So some of the decisions that you would make or experiences that you would have on the periphery are simply not the definition of self that you would have when you are embodying the truth of your divinity here in the world. So sometimes, like I've said, you died because the umbilical cord was wrapped around your neck. But if we go into different levels of your timelines that are made from your direct decisions, sometimes it's like anything, like substance abuse, that there are peripheral timelines where you chose, like, yeah, you chose to try heroin and then became a heroin addict and then whatever, and gutterball, literally gutterball, you ended up dead, whatever, of an overdose or something like that on a peripheral timeline. Made choices and exemplified behaviors that are not the embodiment of the true you, of who you are when you are God, the divine presence, here in a physical form. And of course, that behavior of what we would define God in the physical form is slightly different for each of us, but it boils down to this, or it can be simplified as this: your body is super healthy and doesn't have to actually die. That means everything that you're doing in terms of how you breathe, how your body posture is, what you're thinking about the cells of your body, the dancing, vibrating motions of your DNA, the foods and other things that you choose to ingest, the thought structures that you choose to ingest, how you are choosing to look down different roads of time, what you're doing with your energy, your thought structure, your belief structure, all of that determines whether you are on that central core timeline. The central timeline is you as an arrow of consciousness directly aligned with God. That's big. God is that source or zeroth dimension that you have emanated from the zeroth dimension, from the source, from the divine presence. You've come out here into materiality, experienced all of these wildly divergent experiences where, like, that's not who I am. That's not who I am. And in some ways, that's a good exploration. The periphery in your eyesight, in your divine eyesight, all the things that you're not. You're like, I'm not that, and I'm not that, and I'm not that. Getting towards the refinement of your soul journey, that's just that one incredibly, incredibly least likely path that is the definition of who you are. And as I described in level 1, there's the areas of coincidence that as you shift more and more and more in alignment with that true definition of yourself as divine presence in embodiment, you shift away from other people, but they are themselves on a refinery journey, shifting towards their own perfectly focused self that will meet you again at infinity. So the journey is a shifting away from the overlapping areas of coincidence with other people that you know about until you are exiting that wormhole that is not death. All of the other presences end on the membrane of death, and your sweater gets unknit and you return to the beginning, but only that one central core timeline that is the initial impulse of you. What's really happening is you're coming away from God and you're bouncing back to God, just like that diagram of a laser, coming away from God and bouncing back, away, back, away, back, away, back. And as you do that, you become a coherent light being. That means that your chakra structure, your light body, your body of pure intelligence, or timelines or possibilities, becomes perfectly organized with no wibble wobbles, with all of the peaks and all of the troughs fit together perfectly, and all the wheels fit together perfectly, interact and interrelate perfectly, and everything that is flowing in its flow all interacts and interrelates perfectly. And then there is no need for death, because death is really what happens when you're like wah, wah, like you didn't quite get the equation right, try again. So the answer is you avoid death. I'm plugging in my thing here. You avoid death by having a perfect term paper, or by having a perfect math paper, math equation where you're signing in, giving it to your your professor, hold on one moment. Sorry to be distracting you while I'm doing this. Otherwise, I will lose my notes. I take extensive notes before I come to class, and I want to be able to keep on reading them. Hold on one moment, so I plug in. Good, much better. Thank you for understanding. Handing in your math term paper at the end, all green check marks, no red X's, that's a coherent light being. The personal equations that you explore are unique to you. So that's why the great math teacher, it's like, it's not just one Xeroxed thing that's the same for everyone. It's not just one, you know what I mean? Like one term paper that's the same for everyone. Everyone has a unique set of problems that they have to solve in order to figure out you calculate, you are part of a giant organic quote unquote computer. That does not mean to diminish your presence at all by defining you as a computer. It means that you're performing very, very complex calculations as a subset of a much, much larger being body that is also coming into greater levels of focus and alignment. That is the divine presence. So your life really matters. And I also want to say this about like history's greatest madmen and people that you might know who are sad wrecks of people. You know, if you see someone on the street and they're a shambling homeless person, or if we think of someone who's a madman, a psychopath who murdered a lot of people, like we don't even have to name names, but they exist throughout history. Understand that you are seeing the periphery of that person. You're seeing who they were when they were traveling down a time road that is they're exploring a time road that is not the definition of who they are as God embodied in their physical presence. And also, no offense to anybody who ever died of some disease, like, you know, cancer or something like that. Good people have died of that disease. But that's also not the exploration of who they were or are as perfected divine individuals, because when you are perfected and divine, you don't have to die of these diseases. Again, if you have these diseases or know someone who died of them, I'm not judging you or in any way saying you're bad or wrong. Not at all. This is the understanding simply that aligning with the divine version and definition of who you are means that you are defining your body as being continually healthy and continually filled with life force and sustained by life force to the point that you do not have to have a physical death, but you are able to metamorphosize, to change from being slowed down light. That's what matter is. Matter is light that is moving slower than the speed of light, to increasing your light metabolism, going faster, and then being able to ascend or be so revved up in your light presence that you are able to exist as coherent light. And coherent light is its own structure that does not fall apart or disperse in any way, that you then occupy that coherent light body moving continually through time. That's what the to infinity sign is all about. And of course, as you exit that wormhole, it's not the end of your journey. You exit and you enter into the next level of refinement in a reality structure where then your consciousness is refined even further. And this is an infinite journey. Again, not an imprisonment, not in any way meant to be a punishment. I'm just rearranging myself and getting comfortable here. Not meant to be a punishment. I have to continually affirm this because the experience of being here now can be one of great physical suffering, great physical distress, distress of losing other people who die or pets or things like that. This world is definitely, I admit, has a lot of suffering as its experience. And then you might say, but wait, I'm going to project my future expectations based on my past expectations, and I expect more suffering in the future. And of course, I'm being silly and lighthearted. But don't expect and project forward that the lessons of graduate school are as difficult as the lessons of grade school. Like we've been here in these levels of soul refinery here, where we learn about death and grief and loss and mortality. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we learn that same type of lesson or same level of lesson moving forward or upward or outward into less dense realms. Everything gets redefined. And my experience where I come from as in terms of the Aurora Collective is also completely redefined. And I spoke briefly in level 1. Hold on, sorry, just getting my drink. My beautiful structured water that helps to structure me on a crystalline level. It structures my crystals inside of me. moving into greater levels of clarity does not mean that you have to keep on having like these difficult lessons. And what I remember, the antediluvian world, before death was invented, when there were no gutter balls and everybody won at bowling, no one had to die. And we had a very different experience, and ascension was inevitable. Ascension is still inevitable. I want to think of you to think of yourself. I want you, like Uncle Sam, to think of yourself as an inevitability particle. So you are that infinitely heavy bowling ball that is stretching the fabric of time, space, and consciousness, and that it is inevitable for you to find your way home, to find that pathway home through all of these experiences. And I said, when you see someone who is a shambling wreck, like a drug addicted person, and they're, you know, like whatever, a zombie on the side of the road, or someone who is a maniac, whatever, grabbed a knife and stabbed people, and that is what they are most well known for, or whatever, they machine gunned someone or something like that. What you're seeing is a peripheral example of who that person really is and what their potential really can be. That the real human potential for each one of us is to be the ascended master, or the divine version of who you really are. And that some people are exploring the far outliers on their journey of then refining their soul to this point. So if you, let's draw it out, it's easier, but sometimes I just use my hands so that I don't have to do the whole rigmarole, but I use my mind too. I'm just beaming it into your mind. But let's show you overlapping timelines. So let's say this guy has a perfect, or gal, perfect genetic sweater going up that central core timeline. Now I will draw a different, draw a pink one over here. This pink vortex. And this person over here has this timeline. Not only does it end in the membrane of death, but it matches up a little bit with the purple timeline. That's an eternal timeline of an ascended master. But this pink timeline over here, this person was like a violent drug addict, and they took a lot of drugs and they stabbed a lot of people, and went to jail, and then ended up dying horribly. That version of who they are is not at all themselves as their expression of divinity, of God, of their divine potential. It is an expression of almost the antithesis, or a far outlier, a peripheral self. So sometimes it's about like choices that you make, like, should I go left or should I go right on the highway, or should I get into that stranger's car? And those end in death. Sometimes it's different than that. Sometimes it is, wow, a response to childhood trauma, moving into addiction, ending up in being, a drug addicted person, and then moving towards, violence and psychopathology. That is making choices and exploring the roads of time in a way that does not exemplify divinity. So on the central core timeline, it is your personality that has been refined to the point where you no longer have to die. So for some people, they need to go through those peripheral experiences. Like, yep, on that one, I was a drug addict, and on that one, I was a prostitute, and on that one, I was a psychopathic murderer, and on that one, I, went to a cave and lived as a hermit, and, had no friends. And then finally circulated back to this timeline where I'm actually my true personality. Because when you are your true personality, you press save on that term paper. So there's implied versions of you to the left and right, but that's not those are temporary. You get it? It's the temporary selves. That's not really you. And when you are on your ascended master timeline, you are living the life that is the eternal you. You're like, yeah, I was born there, then I did this, 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 and this, and then brought me here, and then I went through the wormhole. And that is the final edit of your term paper, or the final version of your math homework that you hand in to the great master teacher, the great professor, and say, yeah, this is who I am. And I think I did my work right, check my work, make sure that I'm good. And yeah, you make it through that little tiny eye of the needle. And it's like, yes, you are on the right pathway, you're good. And that is even just one aspect of your journey. You have now refined your soul, then you become a graduate student. And of course you go on in your explorations even more. I want to talk about time being perturbed. So that's the idea of like, you're this impulse of consciousness that is moving upward in this way, but then you have these wakes, time wavelets that come out behind you. So if you have a perfect still pond or tank of water. It's clear. The light that comes through it is unperturbed. Light goes through it and goes through it in a straight line, goes right out through the other side, because the medium itself is invisible, because there's no agitation in there. But when you're moving through time or through a fluid medium like the atmosphere or water, it shakes it all up and leaves these perturbations. So I'm sure you've all seen, if you've been in a pool or something like that, that there's these reflections that kind of come off of it that look like, like waveforms, wavelets, and it can look very beautiful. That's light being reflected through the perturbations of the actual medium. And you can see the water also. You're like, if you look at the ocean, the top looks sparkly. It looks beautiful, but it looks like that because it's all moving and perturbed and things are happening there. It's not a completely still glassy surface that if it were, the light from the sun would be going directly through it. It wouldn't bounce off. It wouldn't appear in that way at all. So it's not to say that the light is ugly or wrong or perturbations are right or wrong. It's just to say that the fluid medium of time, when it is perturbed or mushing all around, disperses the light and changes its trajectory. And that really what you're trying to do in this refinery of consciousness is to clear your perturbations. And I did that when I did my Flying Rainbow Lasagna dance class, like my actual workshop, that some of it feels like being in a vortex, jumping through timelines, jumping through wormholes. It's like kind of like diving through a waterfall. And after you do that, you come out onto the other side into a new time reality that you've come through a vortex. And then what you need to do is clear your perturbations, because you just, like when you dive into a pool, like you dive into a pool of still water, and then the water is like gush, gush, chunga, 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 chunga. Clear those perturbations. And what that means is you are stilling or sending to neutral all of the implied but undesirable things that happen on the periphery as an implication of the initial impulse of your entering into that reality. So I dove into this reality. I'm on the central core timeline. I'm being the real me. Then there's all of these implied things that could happen that are only temporal, that are not the real me, but I don't want to experience. Clear those perturbations, iron them out, make them go still, make them go to entropy, and then exist in that eternal presence that has nothing to do with these temporary perturbations. When time is perturbed, it means that the free flow of energy and consciousness is somewhat diminished. Instead of the light of awareness or time simply flowing where it needs to go, it kind of goes, it bounces all around, chunka, 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 and gets slowed down a little bit. When time is unperturbed, it moves ceaselessly in its flow. And that means that there is no friction. So this is also relating to the concept of love tone. And my mind is clear, and I'm receiving insight, and I'm flowing along on a particular time pathway, unperturbed, as an ascended master, or let's say ascending master, as all of us are moving towards the wormhole and going in that direction. And there is no slowing down, there is no friction, there is no entropy or loss of signal as you are flowing through time. That's what the experience is like. Okay. So when you're in the central core timeline, your body does not cellularly degrade. This is very big. And where's my lasagna? This relates a lot to the concept of Flying Rainbow Lasagna. Your body doesn't cellularly degrade, and instead it transforms into a state that can occupy a higher dimension. So how is this done? And this also, I wrote a song called The Open Door that is about, it's a doorway, it's a frequency doorway. And I wrote about that in Symphony of Life also. The idea that how do you get to this higher dimensional reality? You go through a frequency door. You do so by paring away false beliefs. So you could think of it in some ways as like, an old-fashioned hot air balloon where there's ballast, you jettison the ballast and you go up higher. But it's more than that, because you're kind of shifting yourself to the left or the right. What you're doing is jettisoning false beliefs and falsehoods, that really all of the peripheral aspects of self, that cheeky, quiet down. No. So sorry. I know that's so loud. So loud. She hears my roommates and she has to be so loud. When you are getting yourself away from temporality and going towards eternal divinity, you are paring away untruthful beliefs about reality and about yourself. So if we use the example of the shambling drug addict, there's some aspect of themselves that they believed in that was untruthful, that it was exemplified in their physical addiction behavior. You don't even have to go into the exactitudes of what it was. It might have been a response to abuse or a response to low self-image or low self-worth or whatever it is that makes people go into profound addiction, which again, I'm not in judgment of. The potential exists within almost all of us. You can fall into the gutter ball. Good people sometimes have their bowling balls cheeky. Enough, thank you. Go into the side of the bowling alley because of a false belief about themselves. Here, you want to come be a part of the picture? Come here. You want to come on up? No, you don't want to? Okay, stay peaceful. She had a good walk this morning, so she's just getting agitated. Good people sometimes carry false beliefs about themselves. And their response to trauma or their response to what has happened in their life then leads them towards death. The righting of your ship is about carrying truthful beliefs about yourself and truthful beliefs about reality. So some of those other beliefs that we pare away have to do with disempowerment. I want to joke, throw it out the window. But the disempowerment structure, like structures about saying, well, if it's written in your DNA, it's going to happen. Like, oh, so-and-so had cancer, so-and-so had heart disease, therefore it's in your family, it's going to happen to you. Or alcoholism. That's a part of the epigenetics from level 1. No, you do not have to be fated or determined. Cheeky, enough. No. Go. You're going to go outside. Go outside. Go outside. You do not have to be fated or determined to have negative experiences, such as disease and death. Identical twins do not develop identical diseases. They do not exemplify identical addiction behaviors. So we have a great deal of choice and empowerment in what we are experiencing in our world. Your core sense of self without any distortions or untruths. So sometimes untruths in many ways of the things that are the peripheral definition of self as opposed to your divine ascended master version of self have to do with a low sense of self-worth or a diminishment of your value of who you are, thinking of yourself as being less than great as opposed to claiming your greatness. Getting rid of untruths, distortions, illusions, and falsehoods. That's the ballast that you are jettisoning on this journey towards becoming an ascended master, towards achieving and being the true characteristics, your true character as an ascended master. So first of all, let me also say, not first of all, because I'm almost at the end of this broadcast, millionth time of all, there are many, many ascended masters, as many as grains in the sand, like an uncountable number. Like I said, in the antediluvian world, I remember everybody becoming an ascended master, and that was just an inevitable step on the journey to becoming a coherent light being, which then comes together like organs of an organism that then comes together into a much larger coherency that then eventually becomes a star. All right, spoiler alert, you become stars. But on the journey, you're becoming an organized, coherent light being. And that means that your light lasts for forever and you're eternal. So there are many, many, many of us who have become eternal light beings. And first of all, in your journey of moving from materialism, slowed down light into light that is light and moving fast again, know that you have an enormous amount of support from those beings who have already done the marathon. That's also what it was like in the antediluvian time. You become a coherent light being. You're no longer on the ground with your feet touching the ground. You are circulating around and being a part of that pure light coherency realm, but you know that the songs that you sing and the dance that you emit and the things that you do with your mind and with your collective are absolutely trickling down or percolating to the level of existence that's on the ground. But there was not the sense of separation that there once was, that there is now. Back then, there was not the sense of separation when you ascended that there is now when someone dies. Because when you die, you're moving apart and you're focusing apart in your timelines. But back then, what it was, or at that concurrent time, what it was more like is you recognize that those levels of being exist and you are interconnected with those levels of being, but the people just might not live as your neighbor, but they're just living, but they're just in a different dimension that is still accessible and still very, very much a part of what your life is and what is emanating from your life and what's happening. So there was not the sense of loss when someone ascended, there was a sense of celebration. And that's what those, I would say, not rituals, but like when your birthday, like when you have a moment that you celebrate, it, like no one celebrates death. It's a very sad thing. So-and-so is gone, I feel sad. But when someone ascended, it was like, yeah, like the biggest crowd of an arena, people cheering you, like, yeah, you made it. That's so awesome. And no loss, because then you're there as an ascended master. The term paper is saved. You are eternal from your experience. All of those eternal beings still exist, and they exist, and there's a lot of them, and they exist as support and inspirers and coherent beings that are absolutely here nourishing and encouraging all of us as we are in our journey, as we, you know, are not even in their footsteps, because every time we do it, it's a different level of experience, it's a different level of being. But know that all of that exists in order to help us, and that everybody's got their own unique flavor. So it's not like, oh, like I'm a boring ascended master, I have no personality, just like floating like a cloud. Like that is not what it is like. They're each wonderful, unique individuals with their own unique individual life experiences, talents, personality, set of characteristics. Again, not boring at all, but very real and very accessible, but having refined to the point of godhood, of being God, and that each one of us is also on that journey. So just think about that, the definition of you and who you are. Like, you're not a flawed, stupid human. You're actually a very perfectly defined, perfectly created, divine being that's walking around in this physical presence. Do you understand all of the false beliefs and false narratives and false self stories that make people be shambling drug addicts, or just, I'm just a regular stupid person driving my car and drinking my coffee and blah blah, and I'm, you know, just going and doing my stupid life. No, you're not just a stupid person, you're an ascended master. That's the difference. You jettison all of those beliefs, you refine your consciousness away from all of those falsehoods, and then also you live and exemplify that truth, because your body is a perfect body and you are emitting all this perfect light, and every single thought you think is a divine thought, every single action is a divine action, and every single dance of your DNA is a divine dance of your DNA. It's playing the piano of your DNA perfectly with no wrong notes. Like, not that there's a lot of pressure on you or anything, because I'd be like, oh my God, like my pinky slipped, I played the wrong note. It should have been a C. It should have been a C sharp. Now I'm not ascended. But I'm joking about that, but I don't want you to put so much pressure on yourself. But that is what it's like when you're in that, when you're that level of divine presence. What is it that makes you die is basically a distorted action, a distorted belief structure, a distorted level of experience that then kind of makes your ship go wah, 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 and go over towards the membrane of death. So this is like having a perfect trajectory through life, playing a perfect game, whatever, like a perfect game of pinball. No one plays pinball anymore, but you know, you get this ball to bounce around through the screen perfectly, and you never lose your game, and you keep that ball going for forever. That is what it is like to be an ascended master. And like I said, at the end of this journey of being a physicality structure, just like in the antediluvian time, you don't separate your consciousness from your physicality, and then your physical body falls over and it's dead in a box, and the worms play pinochle on your nose. No, that is not what happens. You don't decompose. What happens is your presence of your physicality transforms into light. So there are apocryphal stories or anecdotes of beings who have achieved this in this world, in the sense of almost like a spontaneous human combustion type of thing, a transforming of state, a transforming of matter from physical dense matter into pure light without the leaving behind of a corpse. And you know, it's almost anecdotal because it is explored in the sense of like, is it real? Has it really happened? Don't be too stuck in the ego. Don't be too stuck also in the ego of so-and-so is a great person, but they left a corpse behind, therefore they're not an ascended master, blah, 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 any of those types of things, because you have to always remember that from your perspective and your point of view, they died. But what really happened is they shifted their consciousness onto their central core timeline, where they are absolutely the ascended master, but from their perspective, they're eternal and you have died. So you have stayed alive on your perspective, they have died, but on their perspective, they have stayed alive and you have died. And in the end, what happens is everybody is aligned with their divine self, and you meet again at infinity, and you meet each other as ascended masters and as divine perfected presences. And that is also truthful of the shambling drug addict that you might have seen on the street, like that guy that's fallen over in the gutter, and that guy actually has a version of self that is the divine perfected self, but it's probably unrecognizable to you from your perspective of how they looked in your reality, where they were overlapping on their peripheral presence, but you meet them again, and then you're able to see who they were as a divine person. Or the madman, the axe murderer, the evil one, the bad person, that was a profound distortion of who they would have been, could have been, should have been, as their central core timeline, true presence that is God. So the inevitability particle, when you're inevitable, you are on that central core timeline, having explored all the wrong notes and dead ends. Like, yeah, I did the madman, I did the psychopath, did the drug addict, did all the things that I'm not supposed to do. And now finally on the correct one, it's you come to the conclusion that you are God, and you let go of all the things that do not serve, and you keep only the key aspects of self. That's what it is to become an ascended master. And that we are in this planetary ascension where we're doing this as individuals. We're doing the individual soul refinery, exploration and refinement towards godhood. And then we're also doing it as a group, as a cohesive whole, as many different organisms. I said, molecular little tiny microbes, dogs, like my little barking dog back there, redwood trees, they are all getting rid of or moving away from the temporal exploration of themselves on the periphery and moving towards the exploration of self as God. Yes, God came and became a redwood tree, and God came and became a chihuahua, and became a butterfly, and became all of these other, became a planet. So there's a version of Earth that is the peripheral version of Earth that is in horrible shape, like being a drug addict or slumped over on the side, like terribly, terribly sick or dying or something like that. We don't have to be on that version of Earth, and we cannot be on that version of Earth if we are to be the ascended version of ourselves. You get it? So as you are writing yourself in your life, the cells of your body are writing themselves in their miniature co-creative existence, and you're on a planet that is also getting in tune with everything. You're healing in this moment now, telescopes backward into previous lifetimes, parallel lifetimes, and your ancestry. Irradiates, I want to say, radiates forward, effulges forward into all of the potentials of life that come in front of you. Everything becomes that convergence of vectors going to the central realization of the reality of divinity. So know that your own healing and your own ascension is synchronized across time, space, and consciousness, beyond merely the synchronization of the clock now to everythingness, and that there's no way to miss the bus. Let me just drink a little bit more, because my throat gets so dry. Hold on one moment. Many people are concerned about missing the bus, and this is also kind of a sense of Christianity. Those who will be raptured and those who will be left behind. And I'm joking and being facetious, but there's even a TV show that I watched that was worthy watching, called The Leftovers, about kind of a rapture event. Some people just poof away, they go away, and they are considered the worthy ones. And then there's those who are the leftovers. And the leftovers, they feel terrible about themselves. They're all involved in self-destructive and addictive behavior because they think that they are worthless, bad, discarded, the poops of the universe, and that everyone else, all the good guys, got to go and that they got left behind. I'm joking. But the lightheartedness is important, because we need to laugh at this. It's the idea like you're not a disposable object, and God's not going to dispose of you. You are God. God does not dispose of self. God loves you profoundly, values you profoundly, but you just have to understand that this process of soul refinement is redefining you as your true self, your truest story of self, as opposed to any lie, distortion, deceit, or illusionary aspect of self. So, a lot of people look at themselves and they think that they are ugly. You're not. Your true version of self is very, very beautiful. A lot of people look at themselves and they hate themselves, or they think that they're wrong and that they've done everything wrong in their life, but you are not. Even if you've made mistakes, blah, blah, blah. You are on the journey of soul refinement. And when you're on your refined pathway, then everything that you're doing is perfect and is leading your soul to becoming that divine version of self. As I'm saying this, I can see how it can get distorted on the anthropomorphic level through the hacked human operating system of the intellect using words. Please tune into the pure presence of my telepathy as I'm talking to you about this, because question. So I can hear the questions already. Well, Aurora, does that mean that if I've made any mistakes, if I've played a wrong note in my piano recital here, does it mean that I'm going to have to circulate back to the beginning? Should I just throw it all out the window, jump out the window, start again? Like, no, please do not kill yourself and think that you have to start again just because your pinky slipped and you played C sharp instead of C major. Please do not do that at all. There's rectification. Remember I tell you about this? My pencil with an eraser. Oops, I made a mistake. I erase that out and then I go write something better into place. And that, in a lot of ways, that response is the ascended master response. Personal accountability, radical self responsibility, and accountability. You admit to your mistakes. That's the greatest pain I think that most people will feel. It's not the pain of like having your arm amputated or whatever, like falling into a wood chipper. That's nothing in comparison to the idea of your ego actually having to admit to a mistake. Say, I did something wrong. I did something wrong and now I need to fix it. That's the pencil with the eraser. The version of you that is in the soul refinement, that is becoming God, is the version of you that can openly admit to your mistakes and then fix it. Take responsibility for what you have done, go in the right direction. So in a lot of ways, you can be like, okay, wrong direction for a long time, and then fix it, go in the right direction. So please understand that. And I've also said this, for a long time, you had to explore every single wrong note on the piano until you finally get to the right note, which is ascended mastery. But in this generation, you can do things a little bit differently. Flying rainbow lasagna, the idea you've got a needle of awareness that is on the record of your life. But let's say there are some songs that you don't like, you want to skip them. Like, I don't like that song. I want to pick up the needle of my awareness, move it to a better groove, play that track instead. Get to make choices like that instead of the inevitability of, let me just walk on the wheel of time a few million more years until I finally spiral towards the inevitability of that central core timeline. You can, in this generation, choose to get off of this peripheral zone, go over here and realign with this central core timeline and skip a lot of the wrong notes. And that's big also. So I'm reassuring you that you won't be left behind because you are inevitable, but I'm also reassuring you that you don't have to trudge like drudgery. Oh, another time through the washing machine, another time through the washing machine, again. You don't have to do that if you have a powerful decision-making presence, pencil with an eraser, quantum ability to make different decisions. Basically, that's what it is to become a third-dimensional experiencer of time. So a flat two-dimensional little animal, like an ant, walks across the surface of time. It does not have wings, it cannot fly. It goes around and around and around on the spiral. It goes, and then finally, after a million tries, it gets to the middle. But let's say you're like a butterfly. I can jump off the surface of time. I can also see and assess all of these different possibilities, and I can fly directly to the possibility that I want to experience, go towards the possibility that is my central core persona, and experience those realities. Being on those central core realities is what used to be the definition of what it was to be alive. Nobody ever explored the periphery. Then we got into this level of exploring every single periphery and every single wrong note before you got to the final exit from this experience. And what I'm trying to say to you is now you have an option. You don't have to explore everything that has ever been created for you that is a negativity or ends in death. You can skip a lot of it, like been there, done it, boring, don't want to, gonna skip to this part because it's about life lessons. So basically, you have to be able to show your math homework, make certain that you've learned those lessons. But if you're like, no, I've done those lessons, I don't really need to do them again and again and again and again and again, go directly to the pathways that basically you get to make better decisions. This is a positive eternal journey of refinement. Again, not a purgatory, not an endless marching through karmic loops and running on hamster wheels and never getting out and endless energy harvesting. It's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be a joyful, eternal experience. So we come out of this world that has a lot of physical pain, emotional pain, death and separation, a ton of suffering. And to me, that is not what the definition of being in existence is. To me, the definition of being in existence is much more about joy, and to have eternal life is a joyful thing, not a punishment. But the qualitative existence of what it is to be alive is redefined so that you would be like, hooray, eternal life, instead of, oh no, eternal life, like more of this. So that's it. That's what I'm trying to get across to everyone. If there are questions, comments, or anything else, now is a perfect time. I invite you towards it. And again, I encourage everyone to actually watch the recorded lessons, because even though I talk fast and I try to get to all the pictures, there's no way that I can get through everything that I have that's recorded. So access the recorded lessons on Teachable. And I think that I said this again, but let me just say it again. Each one of us has the potential to be an ascended master, to be a Christ facet of the crystalline consciousness that is as great as the person that we know as Jesus, who is the teacher that was here before us. Each one of us has that potential inside of us, but you have your own particular talents and gifts and flavor. And again, I do not mean to sound blasphemous or diminishing in any way of that great teacher or anybody that has a belief in any great teacher. They are meant to be like athletes that we look up to. Like, that's an athlete. I want to be as amazing in my spiritual athleticism as that person. But it also means you do not have to do, what is it called? Imitation. You cannot imitate everything about their life and their life trajectory, including their suffering and death or whatever was their gift or presence or magic spell that they gave to the world. You must do your own unique piano solo, play your own unique music. So this is my issue that I have for people that wish to use Jesus as the example of their life. Like, first of all, celebrate the life, not the death, but then also you do not have to end in suffering, death, and crucifixion. That was that person's journey. You can redefine what it is in this generation now. And that's my understanding of what Christian rapture can be. Again, not a biblical literalist, but if I were to use the allegory of rapture as being similar to ascension and what we're experiencing, it means that you do not have to die a physical metabolic death in order to reach a paradise state of pure freedom and connection to divinity, that we're in that generation now. When that amazing experience occurs, that basically abrogates the necessity of death. So again, I don't find myself in my teachings to be in conflict with the traditional Christian belief system. And I never mean to be disrespectful in any way, because a lot of people will say the only way to get to heaven is through the bridge. Jesus is the bridge. That's the only way. Otherwise, you're talking blasphemy. So I'm aware it's difficult. Like, I have to become very defensive in all the things that I say, because I've been teaching this for a long time. So again, not diminishing anyone's religious beliefs, not intending to sound blasphemous, but intending to offer the direct option, path, and plan to be able to reconnect with divinity, abrogating the necessity of physical metabolic death, and in alignment with the allegory or idea of a rapture or physical life reconnection with God, as opposed to having to go through death and then transcending death and then either resurrecting back into life or having the paradise experience. So go directly to paradise. You do not have to go through the death experience. And that's also what I'm looking at in terms of our outer contextual reality that we project as individuals and as a collective. You don't have to have God shake the giant Etch-a-Sketch and destroy everything. No firestorm, no flood, none of that. I really believe that we can, it's like renovating a house while you still live in it. You don't have to knock down the entire house and then have no house and then rebuild the house. What you can do is be like, we're going to change that room, and we're going to change that wing, and we're going to change the roof, but we're still going to live here while we're doing it. So we're doing a reno, not a demo, okay? Renovation, not a demolition. So yes, opening the floor now to any questions or comments or anything that I can say while it is relevant. And also, I still offer the option to do a separate recording. Like this is on YouTube, but if there are any questions or topics that would not be appropriate for YouTube for whatever reason, then I'm happy to do a separate recording and I put it out for patrons or put it out on Vimeo. That is just a more open platform for me to be able to speak on. And if not, then I'll end the recording because it's almost time for me to do that. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording for right now. 2 students in the class, I sent out your homework videos to watch, which were all about supercoiling of DNA. So I hope that you got those and watched them. If not, check them out. For people that might be accessing this who are not enrolled students, I invite you to enroll because you definitely get even more food and nourishment and lasagna than from simply accessing the lecture. And you can also do independent research if you want to look up the word would be supercoiling, DNA supercoiling, to see what I was actually talking about in level 1. And I'm going to say thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone.